Branding is one of those things where you don't really notice brand design until you've seen bad brand design. And I'll tell you, sometimes brand design can be really bad. Today we're going to be looking at 3 of the biggest branding failures of all time, specifically in the world of rebrands. We're going to see what these rebrands looked like, what made them so bad, and what my thoughts are. But before we get into it, be sure to support the show by giving this episode a like, leaving a comment, and of course, by subscribing. This is Ziggy the Designer, the show where we talk about the world of graphic design and the people who make it move. Design is all around us, so we might as well talk about it. Now, you can't talk about the biggest branding failures without talking about Gap. So let's get into it. If you went to art and design school, or if you've even taken like an entry-level marketing class, you've seen this rebrand. This rebrand happened in 2010 on the heels of the Great Recession. Gap was in an interesting spot at the time. They were experiencing decreasing sales, seeing a 10% sales decline in 2009. And there was also talk about brand fatigue, right? People were getting a little tired of the old Gap look, right? They've had the same logo for years, decades even, so maybe it was time to shake things up. So this is where Gap landed. A major 180 for the brand. You're going from this classic navy blue box, right, with Gap set in this iconic, narrow, high contrast serif font. And you're going from that to Gap set in bold Helvetica with that iconic Gap box playing a much smaller role off in the corner, literally off in the corner of the logo. It only lasted about a week. The reason this rebrand did so bad was because, with this new logo, Gap was essentially abandoning everything they've built up to that point, right? In an article about this failed Gap rebrand, the Branding Journal writes, "Consumers use logos as a key signifier of a brand. It's often the first thing that comes to mind when a person thinks of or hears a brand name. Changing your logo at the drop of a hat causes confusion and risks depleting any brand awareness that has been built." So after building all of that, customer trust, after building all of that brand loyalty, Gap threw it all away just like that. It reminds me of that classic saying that you hear in marketing and that you hear in sales, right? It's harder, it costs more to acquire new customers than it is to keep your loyal ones. And I'll tell you, Gap lost a lot of loyal ones when they dropped this logo, when they dropped this rebrand. So I do agree with all the sentiment regarding this rebrand. This was a horrible rebrand. From a design standpoint, the design was uninspiring, right? The reference to that Gap box, right? The Gap square in the corner, it feels like an afterthought. And the move to Helvetica, when you combine it all together, it all felt like an abandonment of not just Gap's identity, but the identity of their customers. This might go down as the worst rebrand of all time. Up next, we have another player in the fashion world, and that's Burberry. This rebrand happened in 2018. And if you were the head of a luxury fashion label at the time, you were hopping on the hottest trend, and that is bold sans serif word marks. People were fawning over this back in the day. We saw Balenciaga do it, we saw Diane von Furstenberg do it, we saw Celine do it, and then we saw Burberry do it. That's right. This on screen right now was the logo that Burberry introduced in 2018. And to be fair, this logo didn't live in a vacuum, right? The brand also introduced this monogram and pattern inspired by Burberry's namesake, Thomas Burberry. And this rebrand was met with mixed reviews. I remember. I think the fashion world forgave it simply because that was the trending look of the time. But the design world was pretty disappointed. I rember seeing this and being confused. This is Burberry we're talking about. This is a luxury fashion label. Why does it look so plain? Melina Thalassino of Transform Magazine, which is a publication dedicated to branding and brand development, she wrote a harsh review of this rebrand, writing, "To now see one of the most quintessentially adored British brands seemingly lose itself with a rebrand like this is really hard to watch." The designer who led this Burberry rebrand, Peter Saville, was interviewed by Penny Martin when this rebrand launched. In this interview, Saville talks about creating the new logo, saying, "We started by proposing 12 variations of the logo type, including taking a new approach to the utilitarian provenance of Burberry, confident and functional, but with something a little kinky about it." Wild thing to say about a brand, by the way. It is a complete step change, an approach that taps into the heritage of the company in a way that suggests the 21st century cultural coordinates of what Burberry could be. So here's the thing that I absolutely hate about this explanation from Saville. We're talking about the logo and how it came to be, right? And we're talking about the logo's personality and how it taps into heritage and how it taps into something a little risque. So where is it? A few years ago, Burberry ultimately decided to move on from the logo, and the treatment that they launched is miles better, or kilometers better than what they did in 2018. It actually shows us heritage by bringing back Burberry's equestrian knight image, which Saville moved away from back in 2018. So if anything, if you're taking anything away from this case with Burberry, it's that brand stories aren't effective if you don't lean into them 100%. Finally, moving away from fashion, we're going into the world of food and beverages. We're going to look at Tropicana here, specifically Tropicana orange juice. This rebrand was done in 2009, another rebrand on the heels of the Great Recession. This rebrand really centers in on packaging design here, and much like what happened with Gap, this was a total 180. Taking a look at it, we go from this very classic orange juice packaging, right, with the image of the orange and the straw and the 100% pure and natural orange juice call out right below all of that. It feels very fresh, in the case of like fresh fruit. Now, the updated packaging, it gets very simple, perhaps maybe even oversimplified. We're met with an image of a glass of orange juice instead of an actual orange. The Tropicana word mark gets put on the side and it gets smaller, and the visual hierarchy gets changed because of that. Tropicana ultimately lost the plot with this rebrand, with this new package design. This rebrand was met with a ton of backlash, right? Tropicana pulled this packaging design after only 2 months. The Branding Journal wrote about this rebrand. Many customers didn't recognize the product on supermarket shelves. Some loyal consumers saw the 100% orange juice and asked themselves if the product was still the same as the Tropicana Pure Premium they always trusted. I feel like Tropicana went wrong here in 2 areas. The first is that they moved away from showing an actual orange, right? In turn, the messaging of, pure orange juice isn't nearly as strong, and it also weakens the communication of what this product is. Second, they treated the logo as an afterthought. Tropicana is a brand that's held in high regard. There's no reason to not only change the logo, but to make the logo smaller and put it on the side. In my opinion, this is a classic case of designers designing for other designers. As a designer, personally, I thought the updated packaging looked pretty clean. And, that is because as a designer, I get what they were trying to do here. But there was no reason for Tropicana to touch that packaging, right? Orange juice is one of their best-selling products. If anything, this case just reinforces the classic saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But how do you feel about these rebrands? Were there any that I missed? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. That's all I have for you. Be sure to give this episode a like, subscribe, and share. I've been Ziggy the Designer. If there are 2 things you need to know about me, it's that 1, I love design, and 2, I'm very opinionated. I'll talk with y'all later. Bye-bye.